I think that power and influence is not always flashy. It's not always something that comes in a package that looks like you want it to. But I do think that there's a power in a still small voice. I think there's power and conviction, and I think Governor Walz has that. And I think JD Vance has got another thing coming if he thinks he can underestimate Governor Walz as when it comes to a debate. And I think that the American people are going to see in Governor Walz that he's a character, he's a principled, character-driven leader.
Kamala Harris has announced Tim Walz as her running mate for the upcoming presidential election. As governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz has gained a reputation for being, well, quite normal. A normal Midwestern dad who seemingly gets things done. Kamala Harris will hope the appointment will help her win over rural swing state voters. He is a former geography teacher. Walz has also been credited with providing a new line of attack for the Democrats. He keeps referring to the MAGA, Make America Great Again, movement as weird. Here he is on the offensive.
I know it as a teacher. A bully has no self-confidence. A bully has no strength. They have nothing. The fascists depend on fear. The fascists depend on us going back. But we're not afraid of weird people. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid. But look, one day ago, a poll came out and showed Kamala Harris up 10 points and Donald Trump getting his ass handed to him here in Minnesota. But to complete his trifecta, he lost in 16, he lost in 20, he loses in 24.
And as I speak to you, Tim Walz is getting on an airplane to go to join Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania ahead of a rally this evening. It looks like a lovely, lovely day in Minnesota. Let's speak to Christopher Huntley, Democrat strategist, former speechwriter for Kamala Harris. Christopher, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Callum. It's good to see you again.
It's great to speak to you. Let's talk about Tim Walz then. How are you feeling?
Yeah. Listen, we are feeling energized. I mean, I got to take a step back, and talk about what the last month has looked like in American politics. It has felt like a year. President Biden made the deeply personal and correct decision to step aside and then endorse Vice President Kamala Harris to lead the top of the ticket. Not only is she qualified, not only is she prepared to do the job, she's been doing the job as vice president, but then there's a historic nature of her candidacy as a black woman, the first black woman, first South Asian woman to be nominated to our ticket. We got that history officially just yesterday. And then you add to the momentum that we are feeling as a party. Vice President Harris has not just energized the Democratic Party, she has electrified it. Every choice, you've seen it, $300 million in just 1 month of grassroots level support. And then now we are adding to that the selection of Governor Tim Walz as her vice presidential pick for the ticket. The best thing and the smartest thing that a nominee can do, and the first decision they make, is to choose a vice president. And in Governor Tim Walz, she has someone who, like you said, is a normal guy from the Midwest, a complete and total contrast to someone like JD Vance, a phony, who is weird, right? That we got from Governor Walz. But he's been a formidable person and leader in Minnesota that's been able to reach across the aisle, work with Republicans, fight for freedoms, LGBTQ freedoms, abortion rights, and reproductive freedoms. We just have in this entire ticket, Harris, Walz, the most progressive and the most advanced in terms of freedoms and rights ticket that we've ever had. And so we're feeling great this morning, and we're looking forward to continuing our momentum into our convention next week, where we will show the world what it means to be a Democrat in 2024.
Tim Walz on Twitter says it's the honour of a lifetime to join Kamala Harris in this campaign. I'm all in. Vice President Harris is showing us the politics of what's possible. It reminds me a bit of the first day of school. So let's get this done, folks. Join us. Is there a risk that he is boring? I noted one Republican commentator, Christopher, keen for your response on this, who said Harris had a real chance to win over independents and disillusioned Republicans by picking a more moderate VP like Shapiro. With such a tight race, choosing the safe option to appease progressives feels like a missed opportunity. Worth noting that Josh Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania. What do you make of that?
I think that, we have, and led by, American politicians, there has been what I call the celebritization of politics, where we think that we need to have these movie characters as our leaders. We need characters that represent our values. And if you look at what's happening in Minnesota, there's a trifecta. Democrats run the entire government there. And what do you have there? You have, policies that impact, young people, policies that give freedoms and rights to women that they already deserve and had, but were taken away by extremists. So I don't think that we have the risk of running a boring, VP nominee. I mean, if you look at the last just week cycle as he was competing for the nomination, you led in with your segment that his entire message led the national international conversation about how we are drawing a contrast between Democrats and Republicans. The entire idea about being weird. I think that power and influence is not always flashy. It's not always something that comes in a package that looks like you want it to, but I do think that there's a power in a still small voice. I think there's power in conviction, and I think Governor Walz has that. And I think JD Vance has got another thing coming if he thinks he can underestimate Governor Walz as when it comes to a debate. And I think that the American people are going to see in Governor Walz that he's a character, he's a principled, character-driven leader. I mean, you talked a little bit about how he was a school teacher, he was a football coach, but he was also the president of the Gay Straight Alliance for the students there. So there's a lot of character in this man, and I'm excited for America and the world to get to know him very soon.
In the big picture, Christopher, and we can make this relevant to the Harris-Walz campaign as well. In the big picture, would you expect this sort of selection to have any sort of notable impact, positive or negative, indeed, on the Harris campaign? I ask that because somebody we spoke to on this program yesterday suggested that actually when you choose a vice presidential running mate, the risk is actually that they will do more harm than the good that they could possibly do as a running mate. Do you see what I mean? So actually they could drag you down, perhaps as JD Vance is doing arguably with Donald Trump, rather than boost you up. What would be your take on Walz?
I mean, I think that's a fair assessment, but Callum, you have to remember this. We are in unprecedented times. 4 weeks ago, we had a different nominee,
Yeah,
right?
true.
This entire playbook, everything that we think applies to this race, everything that we think applies to the logic as it relates to this moment is unprecedented. So I don't think we can look back. And it's notable that the vice president has said that we are not going back, right? We are putting forward a forward thinking, positive, inspirational vision for the future. And I think that what's going to happen with this announcement, as we're seeing, is that Democrats are going to continue the momentum that we have. The other piece that I would add to this about Governor Walz that we've seen and that you may have heard in some of the coverage is that he enthuses an amount of joy into this race. The contrast that he draws between himself and extremists, himself and Republicans, isn't necessarily about demeaning or putting folks down. When you are a governor in a state and you run the entire and your party has a trifecta of all elements of government, you have to know how to get things done. When he ran for Congress for the first time, he won a seat in Congress from Minnesota that had only been held by Democrats twice in 100 years. Right? Like this man knows how to reach across the aisle. And I think when you add that kind of centrism and that kind of the ability to reach across the aisle to the electrifying top of the ticket that is Kamala Harris, and you see that the what happens across America, across culture, across music, across entertainment, where everyone is all in for Kamala Harris, and now we'll be all in for Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. I think what we're seeing is a moment for history. But listen, we cannot afford to take anything for granted. We still have Donald Trump and JD Vance on the other side, and this election is going to be a nail biter. So we can't lose any foresight, and we gotta, leave no stone unturned to win this election for the future democracy.
Christopher, it's so good to speak to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining
Always.
us.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. We'll speak again soon. That's Christopher Huntley, former speechwriter for Kamala Harris, who I think it's safe to say is excited about the announcement of Tim Walz as her running mate.